All right, let's get right into it. We're going to explore the deep biological reason it feels so, uncomfortable when our core beliefs get challenged. And I mean physically uncomfortable. Turns out, it's not just in your head, it's actually hardwired right into your brain's defense system. I mean, really think about it for a second. You know that feeling, right? That visceral, almost gut-wrenching sensation when you realize, oh man, I was completely wrong about that. It's not just a thought, it's a feeling. So the big question is, why? Why does our biology react so strongly?
Well, for decades now, psychology has had a kind of go-to explanation for this feeling. You've probably heard of it. It's a theory that has really dominated our whole understanding of why we defend our beliefs so fiercely.
And that theory is called cognitive dissonance. The basic idea is that our minds absolutely crave consistency. So when our actions don't line up with our beliefs, like, when you buy that expensive gadget you know you can't afford, you feel this icky, uncomfortable tension, and we are super motivated to make that feeling go away. But here's the catch. Cognitive dissonance is a fantastic description of what we feel, right? It totally nails the what, but it doesn't really explain the mechanics of how or why it's happening in our brains. It's more of an after-the-fact observation, not a root cause. So to find that, we've got to go deeper, way deeper, into what the brain is actually doing all day long. Okay, so what if I told you that your brain's number one job isn't just reacting to the world, but actually predicting it? There's this new framework in neuroscience that is completely flipping our understanding of the brain on its head. Yeah, you heard that right. Your brain is essentially a prediction engine. It spends all its time building this incredibly detailed model of the world, what things are, how stuff works, who you are, and then it's constantly running simulations, just guessing what's going to happen next based on that internal model. And this whole process works in a pretty simple loop. Okay, step one, your brain makes a prediction. I think this will happen. Step two, your senses, your eyes, your ears, bring in the actual data from the real world. Step three, if there's a mismatch between your prediction and reality, bam, your brain generates a prediction error. You can just think of this as the feeling of surprise. And finally, step four, your brain has to fix that error. It can either update its belief or it can try to act on the world to make the data fit the original prediction. And here it is, this is the crucial link. That uncomfortable, nagging feeling of cognitive dissonance we talked about, that is the prediction error. It's a biological alarm bell screaming, hey, something doesn't add up here. It's the signal that your internal model of reality just crashed. And, the bigger the crash, the worse it feels. Okay, so now let's take this idea and apply it to something way bigger, our sense of self. What happens when that prediction error isn't about something small, like whether a door will open, but it's about who you fundamentally are? You see, our identity isn't just a label we stick on ourselves. It's a core part of our brain's predictive model. Being a fan of a certain sports team, or a member of a political party, or even just part of a tight-knit community, all of that gives us a shared set of expectations that help us navigate the social world. It's like having a script, so you can predict that your friends are going to cheer for the same things you do. Now, in the language of this new science, your core beliefs, the stuff that makes up your identity, are what we call high-precision priors. All high-precision really means is that your brain is extremely confident in them. It doesn't treat them like flexible opinions. Oh no. It treats them like fundamental, non-negotiable facts about the universe, like gravity. So this is where it all comes together. Think of this as a translation guide from the old psychology to the new neuroscience. That aversive state of dissonance, that's just an acute prediction error. That thing we call rationalization or defending our beliefs, that's the brain performing active inference to minimize that error. A core belief is really just a high-level model, and how important that belief is to your identity is simply how much precision or confidence your brain gives it. It all maps over perfectly. Okay, so we know what it is now. It's a prediction error. But let's actually peek under the hood and see what's lighting up inside our skulls when one of these super important, high-precision beliefs gets threatened. So when you see or hear something that challenges one of your core beliefs, there's this incredible tug of war that happens in your brain. First, a region called the anterior insula fires up. This is your brain's threat detector, and its job is to generate that awful, stressful, uh-oh feeling. But then, and this is amazing, when you start to rationalize, when you find a reason to dismiss that new information, a totally different circuit kicks in, the brain's reward system. We're talking about the ventral striatum. And that feels good. It feels good to successfully defend your belief. And honestly, if you take one thing away from this, let it be this. Rationalization is not just some mental trick we play. It's an intrinsically rewarding process for the brain. Your brain literally gives you a little hit of pleasure, a little dose of dopamine for successfully fighting off a threat to your worldview. And of course, that reinforces the behavior, making you even more likely to do it again next time. All right, so now let's zoom out. Let's see how this deep, ancient brain mechanism plays out in our hypermodern, very online world. Think about it. Social media algorithms are basically experts at minimizing our prediction errors. They are designed to build these perfect little echo chambers that just feed us a steady diet of information that confirms what we already believe. It confirms our high-precision priors. And from our brain's perspective, this is great. It keeps our internal model of the world nice and stable, coherent, and constantly validated. So what happens on the rare occasion that some contradictory evidence does sneak through? Well, because our social identity is such a high-precision, confident belief, our brain just automatically treats that new info as low-quality noise. It's something to be ignored or discarded. And remember, defending our group's view triggers that neural reward signal we just talked about. This is how you get to a point where different groups can look at the exact same set of facts and come to completely opposite conclusions. They're both just trying to minimize their own internal prediction errors. The brain's need to be consistent inside starts to become way more important than its need to be accurate about the outside world. Which, of course, leaves us with a really fascinating and maybe a little troubling final question. We all like to think of ourselves as rational people, right? But what we've just seen is that our brains are literally hardwired to protect what we already believe, and they even give us a little reward for doing it. So if your own biology is pushing you to feel consistent rather than be correct, how do you ever decide when it's actually time to change your mind?
We've all been there, right? You stake out a strong position on something. Maybe it's a big life decision you commit fully. Or, maybe it's a core political belief you've really internalized.
Sure, something central to who you think you are.
Exactly. And then, bam, the universe just drops this huge pile of evidence right in your lap.
Clear evidence, unambiguous stuff.
Totally. And it contradicts everything you thought was true. It just threatens that whole belief structure.
Yeah.
And what's our first reaction? Our gut instinct. It's usually not, oh, okay, time to update my beliefs and admit I was wrong.
No, not typically. It's more often the opposite, isn't it?
Right. We dig in harder. We start rationalizing, finding these creative, sometimes, frankly, absurd mental gymnastics to defend that original stance.
That feeling you just described, that really agonizing internal tension, that's the classic experience of cognitive dissonance.
Ah, okay. Festinger's big idea.
Precisely. For decades, cognitive dissonance theory, CDT, it's done a fantastic job of describing that tension and the drive we feel to rationalize things afterwards.
It tells us what happens when, say, our actions clash with our beliefs.
Exactly. But today, we're going a step further.
Okay.
We're embarking on a deep dive to move past just describing the symptom. We want to track down the specific neurological mechanism, the computational mechanism behind it all.
So not just the what, but the how and the why. How does the brain actually pull off this elaborate self-protection routine?
Absolutely. And the sources we're looking at today are really powerful because they bring together these different fields.
Which fields are we talking about?
We're synthesizing classic social psychology, CDT, of course, but also social identity theory, SIT, with some really cutting-edge computational cognitive science.
Like what?
Specifically, things like the free energy principle, FEP, and predictive coding, or PC.
Okay, FEP and PC, these are brain as prediction machine ideas, right?
That's a good way to put it. And this synthesis, this blend, it moves us from just a post hoc description of dissonance, describing it after it happens, to a much more rigorous mathematical, mechanistic explanation.
We're essentially trying to decode the brain's instruction manual for avoiding being wrong, or at least feeling like we're wrong.
You got it. That's the mission.
All right, so let's start right there at that fundamental computational level. If we're thinking of the brain as this prediction engine, what's its main goal? What's it trying to do moment by moment?
Well, the foundational idea in predictive coding is that the brain's primary goal is to minimize surprise.
Surprise, like a jump scare.
Not quite like that. It's more of a technical term. Mathematically, surprise is defined as prediction error, PE,
prediction error.
Okay. Think of your brain like a really sophisticated thermostat or maybe a massive spreadsheet. It holds these internal representations of the world. We call them generative models.
Okay.
And it's constantly using these models to generate predictions about the sensory data it's about to receive.
Like predicting where my coffee cup is going to be when I reach for it without looking.
Exactly like that. A perfect example. If the sensory input the sight, the feel of the cup in your hand matches the prediction your brain made.
Then the prediction error is low.
Precisely. PE is low, the system's stable, everything's running smoothly. But if the cup isn't where you predicted it would be.
Then you get a surge in prediction error.
Right, a spike in PE. And the system has to do something about that surprise. It has to either update its model, basically, learn that the cup moved, or it has to take an action to change the sensory input, like physically search for the cup until the input matches a prediction again. Minimize that error.
Okay, that makes sense for physical objects in the external world, coffee cups. But we're talking about internal beliefs, identity. How does this predictive coding framework handle something as complex, as subjective as the self?
That's the key question. And this framework offers a pretty rigorous definition. The self isn't some vague concept here. Computationally, it is defined as a high-level, stable, and highly precise generative model.
Wow, okay. High-level, stable, precise. So it's like the master model.
You can think of it that way. It's kind of the operating system for your cognition. It contains your core, really deep-seated convictions, what we call priors in this framework.
Priors about what?
About your competence, your morality, your adequacy, your place in the social world. Really fundamental stuff.
But hang on, calling the self just a model, doesn't that feel a bit reductive?
Yeah.
I mean, our experience of self feels so much richer, more fluid. We change, we grow. How does this computational view account for that?
That's a really important point. The complexity doesn't just come from the content of the model, but crucially from the precision the system assigns to it.
Precision. What does that mean computationally?
Precision is like the confidence level. How much weight do you give this prediction or this model? Because the self model acts as the foundation for almost all subsequent predictions, about your career, your relationships, your safety, everything.
Okay.
The system treats it as the most reliable, the highest precision prior it has. It's the bedrock.
So the brain is heavily invested in keeping that self-model stable. Because if that model is wrong,
then potentially the whole cognitive structure built upon it is threatened. Updating such a high-precision foundational model would be, computationally speaking, incredibly disruptive and costly.
okay, that makes sense. The system wants stability there above almost anything else.
Yeah.
So if the self is this high-precision, stable, super important model, how do we redefine cognitive dissonance using this computational language?
Right. So in this predictive coding or free energy framework, cognitive dissonance isn't just vague psychological tension. It is simply an acute, subjectively aversive prediction error.
Aversive PE, meaning it feels bad.
Exactly. It feels bad because it signals a severe, significant failure. The self-model, that core operating system, has failed to predict or interpret some major event or decision correctly.
So it's not just a minor glitch in the matrix.
No, it's a red alert. It's the system screaming, "Warning, core operating system might be flawed. This is a major threat."
Okay, let's really unpack this then. What you're saying is, being wrong about something core to my identity feels terrible, not just because, maybe I look foolish socially,
That's part of it, sure.
but fundamentally, it feels bad because it represents a kind of catastrophic computational failure. It threatens the integrity of the most important model my brain has.
That's the core idea. And crucially, the cost of actually updating that core model is perceived by the system as enormous.
Computationally expensive.
Exactly. To update a high-precision prior, like the self-model, requires expending massive cognitive resources. It's like rewriting the foundational code of your operating system.
Okay.
So the system has this incredibly powerful, even adaptive incentive to find a computationally cheaper way out, a way to minimize that awful prediction error signal and restore coherence without undertaking that massive overhaul.
Which leads us right into rationalization, the brain's cheaper workaround.
Precisely.
So if dissonance is this computational error signal, this aversive PE, we should be able to see that in the brain, right? Track the neurological signature of that emotional pain before the rationalization kicks in. Where does the brain actually register that alarm bell?
Yeah, the research points pretty consistently to one key area, the anterior insula, or AI.
Anterior inside. Okay, what's its job usually?
The AI is heavily involved in interoception. That's sensing and integrating our internal bodily states. Feelings like anxiety, discomfort, dread, that gut feeling.
So when you feel that knot in your stomach because you realize your cherished belief is crumbling under evidence.
That physical feeling, that visceral manifestation of the cognitive threat, that's being processed, likely amplified by the anterior insula.
So the AI registers the dissonance, the prediction error.
It seems to be the key hub for registering this effective prediction error. It translates the abstract computational problem, my model failed, into that subjectively awful feeling, I am wrong, or I am incompetent, or even I am threatened. It's the body's alarm bell for cognitive inconsistency.
Okay, alarm bell is ringing loud and clear in the AI. Now, the brain needs to shut that alarm off, right? Resolve the conflict. And that resolution maneuver, that shifting of beliefs or attitudes, that's what we call rationalization. How does the FEP framework define that action?
It defines rationalization as a form of active inference.
Active inference.
Yeah.
Meaning it's not just passive thinking.
Exactly. It's an internal cognitive action the system takes. If the brain can't easily change the external sensory input, like the contradictory evidence is already out there, you can't unsee it.
Right.
Then it takes an action to change the internal state. It actively shifts the belief or the attitude about the original decision or action.
Why?
To minimize that internal surprise, that prediction error signal coming from the AI, and ultimately to protect that high-level, high-precision self-prior.
Okay, so it's an internal action to restore coherence. And what happens neurologically when this rationalization works, when you successfully convince yourself, actually that choice wasn't so bad after all?
This is where the neuroimaging data gets really fascinating. When the rationalization succeeds, when the attitude shifts and the dissonance reduces, we see two critical measurable things happen in the brain almost simultaneously.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, and most immediately, you see a rapid decrease in that anterior insula activity.
The alarm bell gets silenced. The bad feeling goes away.
Exactly. The aversive prediction error signal is successfully suppressed. That's the feeling of relief.
Okay, that makes sense. Relief from the pain.
Yeah.
But you said there were two things. What's the second part? You mentioned a reinforcement loop earlier?
Yes, exactly. This is crucial. The successful defense of the self-prior, the silencing of the AI, isn't just neutral relief, it's actively rewarding.
Rewarding? How?
It's associated with a simultaneous increase in activity in key brain areas involved in reinforcement and conflict resolution, specifically the ventral striatum, VS, and the anterior cingulate cortex, ACC.
Okay, let's break those down. The ventral striatum, VS, that's often linked to dopamine, pleasure, reward processing, right?
That's correct. It lights up when we experience something rewarding.
And the ACC, the anterior cingulate cortex, what's its role here?
Think of the ACC as the brain's conflict monitor and sort of action selection guide. It registers the initial high conflict state, that's the dissonance, the AI screaming, and then it likely helps guide the cognitive system towards the most effective action to reduce that conflict and minimize the prediction error. In this case, that action is rationalization or active inference.
So the ACC detects the problem and steers the solution.
And when that solution, the rationalization, successfully resolves the conflict and quiets the AI, the ACC registers that success. But then simultaneously, the ventral striatum kicks in.
Giving the reward signal.
Precisely. The VS activation delivers that dopamine hit. It's the neurological equivalent of a pat on the back for successfully restoring the coherence of the generative model. It feels good to resolve the dissonance this way.
Okay, now here's where it gets really, really interesting for me. The brain isn't just passively feeling relief when the alarm stops. It's actively giving itself a reward, a little dopamine squirt, for successfully managing to convince itself it was right all along, or at least for preserving its internal coherence.
That's exactly the interpretation suggested by this neurocomputational synthesis. It transforms this defensive maneuver, rationalization, into an intrinsically rewarding behavior. Wow.
And that's the critical insight. It creates this highly adaptive, perhaps sometimes maladaptive in the long-run causal chain.
Lay it out for me.
Okay. Prediction error registers as aversive feeling. AI lights up. The system takes cognitive action, rationalization guided by ACC. That action successfully suppresses the error signal. AI quiets down. And the system gets a reward for the successful outcome. VS activates.
And that reward makes it more likely you'll use rationalization again next time.
Absolutely. It reinforces the mechanism. It increases the brain's behavioral commitment to using rationalization, potentially leading to rigidity. It rapidly restores the integrity of the self-model, which is computational efficient. But it does so, potentially, by hardening the system against incorporating external, contradictory, potentially very useful evidence.
Okay, that's a powerful self-reinforcing loop for protecting the individual self, the individual's core beliefs.
Yeah.
But, our really deep priors, our core ideas about morality, politics, group identity, they're rarely formed in isolation, are they? They're often shared beliefs. That's a crucial extension. We don't exist in a vacuum.
So how does this whole neurocomputational loop, the AI alarm, the ACC guidance, the VS reward, how does it scale up when our social identity gets involved? When it's not just my belief, but our belief that's challenged.
Right, that takes us beyond just the individual self-model and squarely into the domain of collective beliefs. And this is where the synthesis explicitly brings in social identity theory, SIT.
Okay.
The sources we're drawing on emphasize that our individual self-model isn't floating free, it's hierarchically nested within collective beliefs.
Nested, meaning part of a larger structure.
Exactly. You're not just operating based on your own internal predictions. You're also predicting based on a shared understanding of reality, the reality defined by your group.
So how do we translate something like a shared group identity, like being a fan of a specific sports team or a member of a political party or a religious community? How do we translate that into this computational language of generative models and prediction error?
Well, the idea is that a social identity functions as a shared generative model.
A shared model.
Yes. When you strongly identify with a group, you adopt a communal set of shared expectations, predictions, and convictions about the world.
And why do groups form these shared models? Is it just for camaraderie?
Camaraderie is part of it, sure, but computationally, it's more fundamental. The group shares these priors because it allows the group members to predict each other's behavior, coordinate actions, and cooperate effectively. It helps minimize shared prediction error or shared free energy.
So shared beliefs make the group more predictable and stable for its members.
Exactly. And in this sense, things like political ideologies or strong cultural norms can be seen as very high-level, mutually regulated, shared expectations about how the world works and how we should act within it.
Okay, so the group is a shared model. Then, presumably, how strongly someone feels committed to that group identity must influence how much certainty or precision the system places on that shared model. How do researchers actually measure that psychological commitment?
Yeah, they need reliable ways to quantify it. They use robust, validated psychological instruments. One prominent example mentioned in the sources is the Cameron three-factor model of social identity salience.
Social identity salience. Okay, what does that measure? Is it just asking, do you belong to this group?
It's more nuanced than that. Salience captures the psychological importance of the group identity to the individual. The Cameron model, for instance, breaks it down into three key factors.
What are they?
First, cognitive centrality. How much time and mental energy do you actually spend thinking about the group and your membership in it?
Okay, how central it is to your thoughts. Makes sense.
Second is in-group effect. This is about the emotional dimension. How strong are your positive feelings, pride, attachment, liking towards the group and its members?
Got it. Emotion. And the third?
The third is in-group ties. This captures the perceived strength of your connection and sense of belonging with other group members. How interconnected do you feel?
Centrality, affect, ties. Okay, so you measure these factors to get a score for how salient, how psychologically important that group identity is for someone.
Exactly. It gives a quantitative measure of identity strength.
And here's the crucial link, I assume. This psychological measure of commitment, this salience, must translate directly into a key computational parameter in the FEPC framework.
Yeah.
You mentioned precision earlier.
Yes. This is really the core of the synthesis, what the researchers call the precision identity mechanism.
Okay, explain that again. Precision in this context means?
Remember, in the predictive coding framework, precision is basically the mathematical parameter that dictates the reliability weighting. It's how much confidence the system places on a particular model or a piece of sensory information. High precision means this is very reliable, pay close attention, don't deviate much from this.
Okay.
So the mechanism is straightforward. If you have high social identity salience, meaning that group identity is psychologically very important to you based on those measures, then your cognitive system assigns extremely high precision to the group's narrative, to that shared generative model that shared prior.
So the group's beliefs are treated as exceptionally reliable, almost like an unwavering truth by the system.
That's the idea. It becomes a bedrock belief weighted very heavily.
All right, now let's bring in the conflict. What happens when contradictory evidence, cognitive dissonance, comes along? Especially, say, if that evidence comes from outside the group or from a source the group doesn't trust. How does the precision weighting handle that new data?
Because the identity prior is already weighted with such high precision, the incoming contradictory evidence is almost automatically assigned low precision.
Automatically.
Well, the system makes a rapid, often unconscious judgment based on relative precision. It essentially concludes, my deeply held, high-precision group model cannot be wrong. Therefore, this contradictory input must be unreliable noise, or maybe it's misinformation, or perhaps just a temporary fluke.
So the external evidence gets systematically downgraded, filtered out, treated as unimportant noise rather than valuable data that might require updating the model.
Precisely. It's filtered out computationally by assigning it low precision, meaning it has very little power to update the dominant high-precision group prior.
This sounds an awful lot like confirmation bias, but you're giving it a specific computational mechanism based on precision weighting.
Exactly. It provides a potential how for confirmation bias rooted in the brain's drive to minimize prediction error efficiently.
But why? Why would the brain evolve this defensive filtering? Why not just embrace the, adaptive process of updating models with new information? You mentioned the computational cost earlier. Is that the driver here? What's so costly about updating an identity prior?
The computational cost is thought to be immense. Updating a high-level shared identity prior isn't like correcting a simple factual error, like remembering where you left your keys.
How is it different?
It potentially requires revising the foundational shared expectations upon which your entire social existence, your ability to predict and cooperate with your group, is based. It might even require renegotiating your relationship with the group itself. That demands significant cognitive energy and resources.
It's like trying to rebuild the foundation of a house while you're still living in it.
That's a great analogy. And the cognitive system, which fundamentally seeks to minimize effort, to minimize free energy, tends to choose the computationally cheapest path.
And defending the existing prior by dismissing the incoming data as low-precision noise is cheaper than that foundational rebuild.
Much cheaper, computationally speaking. It maintains internal coherence and social coherence with the group, minimizing overall free energy with minimal expenditure.
Even if that comes at the expense of, accurately perceiving external reality.
Exactly. It prioritizes coherence, internal and social, over external accuracy, especially when that accuracy threatens a high-precision identity prior. This is the computational engine driving ideological rigidity and potentially polarization. The brain is wired to find coherence essential, maybe even more essential than accuracy in many contexts.
Wow, okay. We've laid out the psychological drivers, dissonance, identity, the neurobiology, AI, ACC-VS, and the core computational principle, precision-weighted prediction error minimization. Now let's get into the hard data. If identity really drives this filtering process, we need a way to mathematically measure how people update their beliefs, or fail to, when faced with challenging information. This brings us to Section 3, and you mentioned hierarchical Bayesian modeling, HBM.
That's right. Specifically a tool called the hierarchical Gaussian filter, HGF.
HGF, okay, what does that do?
We need a mathematical language, a model that can actually track how beliefs change or stay rigid dynamically over time, trial by trial, and across different levels of abstraction simultaneously. HBM, and the HGF within it, provides exactly that language.
It lets researchers quantify the parameters of learning and certainty in real time.
Yes, as someone is processing information, it moves beyond just looking at the final attitude change and lets us model the process of belief updating itself.
The HGF sounds potentially quite complex. Can you break it down for us? How does it model belief during, say, a social interaction where you encounter information that conflicts with your group's views?
Sure. The HGF typically tracks beliefs across 3 nested computational levels. Think of it as moving from the concrete data point up to your deepest assumptions about how stable the world is.
Okay, 3 levels. What's level 1?
Level 1, often denoted in $1, tracks the belief about the immediate, trial-wise sensory input. This is the specific piece of data you just encountered, the dissonant social feedback. In our example, it could be the specific headline, the expert comment that contradicts your group's stance.
So processing the raw input, what's level 2?
Level 2 tracks the belief about the underlying state that generated that input. In a social context, this often represents the participants' evolving belief about the fidelity or reliability of the source providing the information. Like, is this news outlet generally trustworthy, or how likely is this person telling the truth? This belief updates based on the stream of inputs coming in at level 1.
Okay, so level 1 is the specific message. Level 2 is the perceived reliability of the messenger. What's level 3? This seems crucial.
Level 3, often linked to omega or kappa, is the highest level in this typical 3-level HGF. It represents the belief about the volatility of the level below it.
Volatility, meaning how much things change.
Exactly. It's a high-order belief, amid a prior, about how stable or changeable the source's reliability, level 2, is over time. If you believe the source's reliability is very stable and predictable, your estimate of volatility will be low. If you think it's constantly shifting and unpredictable, your omega will be high.
I think I see the connection now. That level 3 parameter, the perceived volatility, seems like it could be the mathematical linchpin connecting a rigid group identity to the belief updating process. The prediction you mentioned earlier, high social identity salience should correlate with what kind of volatility estimate?
The prediction, strongly supported by research in this area, is that high social identity salience will correlate with a significantly lower estimated omega, a lower metaprior on volatility.
Okay, lower omega. What does that mean in plain English?
It means that if you're highly identified with a group, that group identity acts as an ultra-low volatility prior. Your cognitive system maintains this ingrained, deep-seated belief that the shared group narrative, the group's way of seeing things, is fundamentally extremely stable and reliable. It doesn't change much.
It's treated as dogma, essentially. Mathematically defined dogma.
You could put it that way. It's an assumption of extreme stability.
So if I have this deeply ingrained belief in the stability of my group's view, low omega, how does my system interpret a surprising piece of contradictory information? That dissonant headline, for example, a prediction error at level 1.
Because your high-level belief says things related to my group are stable, low omega, any prediction error arising from level 1 input is systematically interpreted as just temporary, random noise.
Not as evidence that the underlying reality level 2 might actually be changing.
Exactly. The system concludes the model is stable, therefore this surprising data point must be a fluke, an anomaly, not indicative of a real systematic shift. This provides the computational architecture that drives the dismissal of unwelcome evidence. It preserves the belief in stability.
That really does sound like the mathematical fingerprint of polarization.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, what about the learning rate itself? Does high identity salience also affect how quickly or slowly we incorporate new information, even if we don't dismiss it outright?
Yes, absolutely. This is often captured by another key parameter in the HGF, related to volatility, sometimes denoted kappa, which effectively represents the learning rate at the level below.
Okay, kappa, the learning rate.
Yeah.
And the prediction.
High social identity salience is also predicted to correlate with a significantly lower kappa goal, a lower learning rate.
Lower learning rate. So if kappa is a low, the mathematical consequence is basically belief rigidity.
It is the mathematical signature of belief rigidity. A low kappa means that even if the dissonant evidence, the prediction error at level 1, is perceived, it has a negligible impact on updating the higher level beliefs about the source's fidelity or the underlying state, level 2.
So the system is structurally mathematically biased to stick with its existing beliefs, prioritizing that internal coherence and stability over incorporating inconvenient external data.
Precisely. And this provides a potential computational explanation for how opposing groups, processing the exact same stream of information, the same level 1 inputs, can arrive at diametrically opposite conclusions, different level 2 beliefs. It's because they are filtering that information through different high-level priors about stability and volatility, leading to different learning rates.
That's powerful. Okay, so to actually test these ideas, the brain activity, the HGF parameters, the identity effects, the researchers needed a clever experimental setup. They couldn't just ask people hypotheticals. They needed to induce real dissonance related to identity, ideally while scanning their brains. Tell us about that experimental environment.
Yeah, the designs are often quite ingenious. The sources describe using dynamic, highly tailored mock social media environments presented to participants while they are inside an fMRI scanner.
Mock social media, like a fake Facebook or Twitter feed.
Exactly. Designed to look and feel very similar. This is clever because real social media platforms are in many ways natural ecosystems for reinforcing group priors through echo chambers, filter bubbles, social feedback likes.
So it provides a realistic, ecologically valid context for studying these processes.
Right. It's the perfect digital petri dish for this kind of research.
And how did they actually induce the necessary cognitive pain, the dissonance within this controlled environment? How did they trigger that prediction error related to identity?
Typically, participants first have to make some kind of forced choice that's highly relevant to an identity they hold strongly. Maybe it's a choice between two charities aligned with different values, or expressing an opinion on a controversial topic central to their group.
So they commit to an action or a stance first.
Yes, commitment is key for dissonance. Then, immediately after they've made their choice or stated their belief, they receive trial-by-trial, experimental social feedback.
And this feedback is designed to challenge them.
Oh yes, it's meticulously designed to maximize prediction error. It might show that an overwhelming majority of other users disagree with their choice, or present opinions from supposed experts that strongly contradict their position, or show high engagement metrics, likes, shares, for the opposing view.
They're essentially flooding the participant system with what appears to be high-precision, highly credible sensory input that directly contradicts their recent commitment or core group belief.
Exactly. They're forcing the self model or the shared group model to confront its failure in a way that's really hard to ignore or dismiss easily. It creates that strong, aversive PE signal.
And by tracking the brain activity, fMRI, and fitting the behavioral responses to the HGF model immediately after this feedback, researchers can observe the brain's defensive strategy in action, the rationalization, the potential reward signal, and the mathematical parameters of rigidity.
That's the goal, to capture that entire neurocomputational cascade as it unfolds.
Okay, this brings us neatly to Section 4, actually measuring that defense mechanism. And, crucially, exploring whether we can find ways to perhaps interrupt that cycle of rigidity. So, once the dissonance is successfully induced in the scanner or lab, how do they quantify the act of rationalization itself? What's the behavioral outcome they look for?
Well, the classic, simplest behavioral measure is the post-decision attitude shift.
That's the original dissonance finding, right?
Exactly. After making a difficult choice and then maybe getting some conflicting feedback, do people subsequently rate the option they chose as more preferable and the option they rejected as less preferable compared to before they made the choice?
They justify their choice by changing their attitude towards the options.
Right. And the hypothesis here, which generally holds up, is that this defensive attitude shift, the rationalization manifest in changing preferences, would be significantly amplified in individuals with high social identity salience, especially when the choice threatens that identity.
So the stronger your psychological commitment to the group identity.
The more dramatically your internal attitudes need to shift to protect the coherence of that shared generative model when it's faced with an external threat or contradiction. The rationalization effect is bigger.
Okay, but that attitude shift is the end result, the outcome.
Yeah.
How do the researchers try to capture the process of motivated reasoning as it's happening? The actual cognitive or verbal maneuvers the brain uses to defend itself.
That's trickier, but they use sophisticated methods. One powerful approach is detailed linguistic analysis of written justifications participants provide after the task, explaining their choices or reactions to the feedback.
Analyzing the words they use? How?
They adapt coding systems often used in clinical psychology, particularly from approaches like motivational interviewing, which are designed to identify how people talk about change versus maintaining the status quo.
Okay.
In the context of dissonance, they're specifically looking for linguistic markers of defensiveness, often termed counterchange talk, CCT.
Counterchange talk, what does that include?
It includes statements of denial, that feedback isn't really accurate, minimization, this particular choice wasn't that important anyway, and explicit justifications or rationalizations. I chose this because XYZ reasons that ignore the contradictory feedback.
Could you give a concrete example of what that might sound like compared to, say, change talk?
Sure. So instead of someone saying something like, that feedback makes me wonder if I should reconsider my position, which would be change talk. Counter-change talk sounds more like, well, it's not that my initial choice was wrong, it's just that those so-called experts providing the feedback probably have a biased agenda. Or, okay, maybe that one piece of data contradicts me, but it's likely an outlier and doesn't represent the bigger picture accurately. Or simply, I still think I made the right call, regardless of what they say.
So lots of but. It's just that I still think. Basically, language that argues against updating the belief.
Exactly. It's the linguistic fingerprint of the active inference strategy. And a high frequency of this counterchange talk serves as a really useful, quantifiable behavioral proxy for that active process of defending the high-level prior against the challenge.
Okay, so we've got the neurocomputational circuit mapped out, the AI alarm, the ACCVS reward for silencing it, we have the mathematical signature in the HGF. low volatility estimates and low learning race
Mhm.
linked to high identity.
Yeah.
And we have the behavioral proxy in language. Lots of counterchange talk. The really big question then becomes, can we break this cycle? Can we interrupt this seemingly rewarded rigidity? This is where the research brings in self-affirmation theory, SAT, right?
Yes, exactly. SAT offers a potential avenue for intervention, and testing it within this computational framework is really illuminating.
Remind us briefly, what's the core idea of self-affirmation theory?
SAT basically proposes that people have a fundamental motivation to maintain a sense of global self-integrity. We want to see ourselves as generally good, moral, competent, adequate people overall.
Okay, a sense of global self-worth.
Right. And the standard self-affirmation protocol usually involves having some participants engage in a brief task before they encounter the dissonance-inducing situation. Typically, they write about a core personal value that's important to them, but unrelated to the domain where their beliefs are about to be challenged.
Unrelated, like if the challenge is about a political belief, they might write about the importance of creativity or their relationships with family or kindness.
Exactly, something that affirms a positive aspect of their self-concept in a completely different area.
How on earth does writing about, say, my love for my family make me more open to accepting that I might have been wrong about a political issue? It feels like a strange leap.
It does seem counterintuitive at first glance, but the proposed mechanism when viewed through the FEPPC lens is actually quite elegant. It's thought to work via computational decoupling.
Decoupling. What gets decouples from what?
The hypothesis is that self-affirmation helps to decouple the specific belief or identity domain that's currently under threat from the highest level, most general prior about global self-integrity or self-worth. Ah, okay. So walk me through that.
By affirming an unrelated core value, you essentially satisfy or bolster that fundamental high-level prior, I am a good, adequate person, through an independent channel. You've kind of banked a win for the global self-model elsewhere.
You've secured your sense of overall adequacy through this other value.
Right, and because that highest level need for self-integrity is temporarily secured, it immediately alleviates the intense pressure, the computational necessity to rigidly defend the specific, currently threatened, identity-relevant belief as if your entire self-worth depended on it.
It's like you've relieved the pressure valve on the whole system.
That's a great way to think about it. If my global sense of I'm okay is currently stable because I just reflected on being, say, a compassionate person, then my cognitive system can potentially afford to acknowledge that I might have been wrong about this specific political choice, or that this piece of group contradicting evidence might be valid without triggering a catastrophic collapse of my entire self-model integrity. The stakes are lowered for that specific belief. Okay, that makes computational sense. It reduces the perceived cost of updating that specific prior. And what was the predicted result of this self-affirmation intervention on the measures of rationalization we discussed?
The prediction, which has been borne out in numerous studies, including those using these frameworks, was that self-affirmation should significantly reduce both the behavioral attitude shift, less post-decision justification, and the frequency of counterchange talk in the justifications.
Especially in the people who are highly identified with the group being challenged.
Particularly in that high salience group, yes. Because they're the ones predicted to be most reliant on rigid defense mechanisms initially.
And computationally, what does this reduction in defensiveness mean is happening?
It suggests that the system, freed from the overriding need to protect global self-integrity via this specific belief, can now allocate higher precision to the incoming dissonant sensory evidence. It's more willing to treat the contradictory external data seriously.
And if it assigns higher precision to the evidence?
Then the learning rate associated with that evidence should effectively increase. The system becomes more flexible, moving away from the computationally cheap defensive rationalization and towards the more costly but potentially more adaptive process of belief updating and learning.
Wow. That's a really beautiful intersection of social psychology theory, SAT, and this detailed neurocomputational framework, FEPC. It provides a tangible, testable mechanism for how we might promote cognitive flexibility, even when deeply held identities are involved.
It really does. It suggests that fostering belief flexibility isn't just about telling people to be open-minded. It might be more about managing the underlying computational imperative to protect the global self-model. If you can provide resources to shore up that global model, You create space for local flexibility and updating.
Which leads us perfectly into our final section, thinking about the broader implications, particularly concerning these cycles of polarization and belief rigidity that seem so prevalent today in social and political life. Given everything we've discussed, what's the major takeaway about how group dynamics play out when all members are operating under this shared identity, this drive to minimize shared prediction error, and this rewarded defense mechanism?
I think the key takeaway from the synthesis presented in these sources is that the collective drive to minimize shared free energy, to maintain that predictable, coherent, shared reality within the group, leads group members to, often implicitly, regulate each other's thinking.
Regulate each other's thinking. How?
Well, if high identity salience ensures that external dissonant evidence is systematically filtered out by individuals as low precision noise, then when this happens across the group, it creates a powerful echo chamber. The shared generative model is constantly reinforced from within, and challenges from outside are collectively dismissed. Everyone is incentivized to maintain the shared prior.
And that reinforcement loop, we talked about the ventral striatum reward for successfully rationalizing and silencing the dissonance alarm that just compounds the problem at the group level, right?
Yep.
It makes rejecting outside information feel like a socially validated, even rewarding act.
Precisely. The reward signal reinforces the behavior of defending the rigid group prior. This creates a potentially very problematic social feedback loop. It systematically privileges the group's internal coherence over any kind of external accuracy checking.
And the consequence, as the sources suggest, is the formation of these increasingly isolated ideological bubbles.
Yes, where opposing groups can look at the exact same set of facts, the same level 1 sensory input, if you like, and because they filter it through vastly different high-precision, low-volatility identity priors, they end up drawing diametrically opposite conclusions. Their level 2 beliefs diverge completely.
So the intense polarization we sometimes see isn't necessarily a failure of intelligence or access to information. It might actually be the successful operation of this deeply ingrained, intrinsically rewarded cognitive defense mechanism operating at a collective level.
And that's certainly the implication of this neurocomputational perspective. It reframes polarization as potentially arising from these fundamental mechanisms of belief maintenance and social coherence.
Okay, so what does this all mean for us? If this is how our brains, individually and collectively, are wired, how can we use this knowledge? How do we foster cognitive flexibility beyond just doing a quick self-affirmation exercise before reading the news?
Well, the success of the self-affirmation intervention, even if simple, is actually quite hopeful. It demonstrates that these computational dynamics can be modulated.
How so?
It suggests that strategies aimed at decoupling specific beliefs from that global sense of self-integrity are viable. If we can alleviate the perceived existential threat to the self when a particular belief is challenged, we can create the computational space needed for adaptive learning.
So maybe focusing on building self-worth or affirming values in domains completely separate from contested ideological areas could help.
That's one potential implication for therapeutic or perhaps even educational approaches. Bolstering self-worth and affirming diverse values might make people more resilient and less defensive when encountering challenging information in one specific domain. But the sources also point towards future research directions that could go even deeper, trying to probe the underlying mechanism of reinforcement more directly to establish clearer causality.
You mean going after that ventral striatum reward signal itself?
Potentially, yes. If this computational framework is correct and the maintenance of rigid priors is genuinely driven by an intrinsic dopaminergic reward for achieving model coherence and silencing that AI alarm, then future research could, for example, explore using pharmacological manipulations, carefully controlled studies, obviously that temporarily modulate the dopamine system, specifically the reward signals in the ventral striatum while participants are undergoing these dissonance tasks.
And what would that show?
If temporarily reducing the reward associated with successful rationalization with silencing the AI alarm actually changes those HGF learning parameters. If it makes omega go up or kappa increase, making people more likely to update their beliefs.
Then that would be pretty definitive proof that this drive for model integrity, for coherence, is mediated by this intrinsic reward pathway.
Exactly. It would really solidify the causal link and provide a much more detailed computational roadmap. And potentially, down the line, that understanding could inform the development of more targeted interventions designed to enhance cognitive flexibility, shifting the system's balance away from rewarded rigidity and towards more adaptive learning when appropriate.
Fascinating. So we started this deep dive talking about that familiar, almost visceral, agonizing feeling of being wrong, the psychological tension that Festinger called cognitive dissonance.
And I think where we've landed, based on this synthesis of social psychology and computational neuroscience, is that CDT isn't just some vague psychological tension anymore. It's increasingly understood as a quantifiable effective prediction error, likely processed primarily in the anterior insula.
And rationalization isn't just making excuses.
No, it's framed here as a highly effective, intrinsically rewarding active inference strategy, a cognitive action specifically designed to maintain the coherence and stability of our internal generative self-model, especially when that model is tied to a high-precision social identity. We even saw how the rigidity has a mathematical fingerprint in the learning rate and the volatility estimates from models like the HGF.
So we've moved from a description of the phenomenon to exploring its potential mechanistic precision at the neural and computational levels. We now have maybe not the complete picture, but certainly a much more profound roadmap for understanding why we humans are often so incredibly adept at defending our beliefs, even sometimes especially when the evidence seems clearly against us.
And if it's true that our deepest beliefs about the stability of our identity, mathematically captured perhaps by that metapria omega dou, fundamentally determine whether we treat challenging new information as valuable data to learn from or as just random, dismissible noise.
Yeah.
Then the really provocative question for you, the listener, to maybe reflect on after this conversation based on everything we've unpacked today is this. What are the hidden high-precision priors you might be holding right now about yourself, about your group, about the way the world works that could, perhaps unconsciously, be preventing you from learning something really essential?